drafting team, or did you start? Great stuff. Okay, so starting off in terms of what we're going to cover in this half hour or so together, why culture change is so tricky. We'll talk about some tools which you can use to diagnose culture if you want to be doing that, and things. And the two tools we'll look at, one is called the Competing Values Framework by Cameron and Quinn, and the other one is the Cultural Web. So you may have come across them before. What I'll try and do is just run through them and give you some useful tools and also tips if you wanted to apply them in your organisation. We've got questionnaires and things that we'll send out to you. And then a model which is just a really helpful, if you're putting change in place, a practical guide to rolling out a successful change. So that's what we're just going to cover. I really welcome you chatting as we go through. I really welcome that. And with that in mind, let's start off with using the chat. Let us know, why is culture change particularly challenging? Why do you think when people say, oh, it's culture change, you're changing culture, it's kind of it's something that's harder than making a simple change? What do you think? Pop in the chat what you think might make it more difficult. Totally, Elise. Yeah, people don't necessarily like change, particularly if they're happy with the status quo and their habits are a certain way, then they may resist it. Fear of the unknown. Is that Paula there, P. Lewis? I wonder if it's Paula. Let me know if it is. Yeah, I agree, Harriet, because it's unseen. One of the models I'm not going to talk about here particularly, Edgar Schein's model talks about the onion model. It's because right at the centre is our current culture and values. So it's not that visible. Yeah, they don't understand the why. Welcome from rainy Manchester, Gemma. Absolutely. As two people, what they mean by culture change, you get different answers. Spot on, Justine. So there's not a shared understanding of what it is we want. Gail, totally. Often culture change is set by the people at the top, or they may be actually almost working misaligned to their behaviours. Oh, that's very deep, Harriet. Culture is sometimes defined as the answer to questions we didn't know needed to be asked. So one of the things about culture is they talk about the way we do things around here. So it's kind of, I think, so as someone said it earlier, it's something that's not so visible in terms of that. So keep on commenting. And I agree with those conversations. So it's not necessarily easy. You're often going to get buy-in. The sort of things that I was thinking about, you've covered, I think, definitely. Or maybe one is that sometimes you might have reward systems or certain entrenched systems which you might be trying to change the organisation. You might be trying to change your organisation to be quick, entrepreneurial, yet you have to have massive levels of sign off for, you know, even the basic most expenses, things like that, where your rewards, your systems might pull against where you're trying to take your culture. We've talked about leadership behaviours. Definitely this beliefs and norms, it's very deep rooted. So people might have habits and routines they don't want to change. You know, when you rightly put in those different interpretations. The other points I think definitely worth commenting on: alignment. So alignment between the leaders, the managers, the values of the organization, what people are saying and doing, does it line up? So it's got to be aligned. Power is an interesting one. So sometimes people perceive that they're going to lose power as a result of a change. So that can make a difference to it. And not to be underestimated is that culture change doesn't happen overnight. Even if you are a smaller organization, making a change, it's something. It's like any of us, culture change for ourselves. If you decided you were going to create a new way of living or a new way of regular exercise, any sort of habit like that, and it's just down to you, that still takes quite a while for it to be embedded. So I think sometimes because things don't change, well, people don't see things change quickly enough, the time they need long enough to keep on communicating it and keep on making it happen. So there's no doubt it's not a simple thing to do. And those are the sort of things that we have to take into account when we're thinking about or planning the change and having that awareness of it. It's not something that's just simple, it's multifaceted. So I mentioned that I was going to share with you a couple of models. So this Cameron and Quinn is called the Competing Values Framework. I don't know if any of you have used this before. I'll keep an eye on the chat if you're familiar with it or not. I quite like this because it's quite straightforward in terms of this. So they basically say that there's two dimensions, and it shows that some organisations are more effective if they are focusing on flexibility and adaptability, but others, they're actually more effective if they are much more stable. And of course, some size comes into it, in my opinion. I think it's an organisation like the NHS compared to a really small startup. So things like that will make a difference in terms of where you are. But this model that they've come up with, it is actually quite well validated, and is the questionnaire that if you wanted to assess your organization, and you could even get your leaders in your organization to complete it, then you can, and it might lead to an interesting conversation with them. In terms of that, we will send that questionnaire out from Cameron and Quinn, so it'll come out to you if you wanted to have a look at it in more detail. But you can see the difference if you are sort of structured. So if you're very high structure, very stable and inward, something like the NHS, you would be more of a hierarchy here. So you favour structure and control, coordination and efficiency. It's all about stability, timeliness and smooth processes. And of course, if you haven't got smooth processes, then you're not going to get all the benefits of that hierarchy. It could be very slow, it could be bureaucratic, and that can be a problem. But the idea there is do things right. And I guess in the healthcare, that would make sense, right? And then you could have the opposite end of the spectrum. The adage here is adhocracy. So a dynamic entrepreneurial organisation where people take risks. The values are on innovation, adaptability, growth, having cutting edge services or products. So someone breaking out there. So you can imagine that's much more likely to be probably a smaller organisation. Interesting, if you think about the big companies like Google and things like that, they may have started out like that, but can they continue? Because they've got to have those processes and systems. You've got market, where the key there is about competing. So being results orientated, getting things done. Customer driven, because obviously you want to deliver what the market wants. So there's that outward focus. And then you've got the sort of family businesses where the term they use is a clan. So it's all about, it's values based. It might be a really sort of tight social networks. So you might see a few of all of them in your organization. You might see that you're transitioning from one to another. And just for us to have a bit of fun with it, I've got a poll for you just to say which one you think is most like your organization. Let's launch it for you. So if you were to choose one of those cultural styles and say which one is closest to your organisation, which one would you say it is? And I'm interested, if you've said hierarchy, is it a large organisation? Or how many people are in it? And if you've said clan, is it a small organisation? Is that something that fits there or otherwise? So feel free to pop that in the chat. Okay, 70% participation. That's interesting. So you're large now, but you're still trying to keep that clan thing. That's, yeah, okay. And there will be pros and cons to all of these things. One of the things that Cameron Quinn said, that they predicted that 96% of successful or unsuccessful mergers could be predicted by looking at the cultures. So that's the sort of thing. It's they often say with change, people are the thing that makes a difference or not. So actually thinking about, if you are going to make a merger, is there a cultural fit? So doing something like this is a good idea. So 74% participated. If anyone else wants to participate, please do now, and I'll share the poll. Okay, I share the results. So actually we're quite even. Relatively few adhocracies and almost balancing clan and hierarchy. Okay, done, yes. Yes. Family organisations can be very hierarchical. You can see that's yeah, that's interesting. I suppose I think, yeah, that's for me, Rupert Murdoch being the boss of everything, that doesn't feel to me the same in terms of a hierarchy. That's more about decision making is made by one person. It's like the father of the family. So that feels a bit clan-like to me. Whereas a hierarchy for me is where you've got processes and systems embedded down. They may well have them, I guess they do in there. So that's an interesting angle actually to consider in there. Right, let me stop sharing that. Someone else just jumped into the waiting room. And let's stop sharing and get back. So we've talked about Cameron and Quinn. That's something, if you wanted to look into this more so say we'll send something out to you, you can think about it. The thing is, sometimes, is that, is the culture right for your requirements? So they say, if we are very clan-like, very collaborative, doing things internally, are we focusing enough on what the customers need? So all of them will have blind spots, won't they? And equally, if we are being wonderfully creative all the time, do we keep on reinventing the wheel and getting overexcited by new things and then not embedding good systems and processes? So there's something to be taken from all of these areas, and it's thinking, have we got the right type for us? Then I find this model quite useful in terms of, it's called the cultural web. And this is a great one. If you are thinking that you want to put some planning into adapting your culture change, your organizational culture, it's how do you diagnose where you are now in order to think, where do you want to be? Because I think, again, because as someone said earlier, it's something that's hard to see. How do you actually work out what the culture is in your organization? So the sort of things you have is, you have in the center of them your old organizational paradigms, which it's where it's really the unspoken thoughts of what's true within your organization, but they all essentially fit into these other categories here. So you've got these different things that you could diagnose or analyze in your organization as an as is, and I'll give you an example in a minute. And then you could think about, okay, where do we want to be? So if we want to become more forward thinking, more competitive, what is it that we want to do differently, and how do we need to change these things? So we need to think about, what's our structure like? Do we need to change that? You think about the systems. So I talked about embedded systems earlier, power structures in terms of control, symbols. So symbols, things like car schemes or officers, or that's a symbol. You'd have symbols of hierarchy or not. Stories and myths, and then rituals and routines, which become more and more sort of subtle and not necessarily so visible. So I've got an example here of an example where an organization, it was a large organization that wanted to be more competitive in the marketplace. So where they were, they had positives in terms of where they were financially stable, trustworthy. It's all quality and research driven, but steady and slow. The organizational structures were hierarchical roles, and they had formal reporting into a parent company and lots of processes that would go out of the country. You had a board of directors, and there were non-execs, which were making decisions. You'd have formal budgeting rounds, headcounts, and objectives being cascaded down from the parent company. The power structures were very much at director level, but there was also power outside of the organisation from the parent company, which would be felt within that organisation. Traditional symbols, brand and logo, parking spaces for the top execs. This is going back a bit. I don't think that many people have offices anymore, but there was officers, status related to size of office, and people wore formal suits at work. They had all these rituals and routines, sales conferences, board meetings, annual report, long service and awards, those sort of things which were evident that were rolling. And then the stories and myths. So whether they're true or not, the sort of things that people would say about others. So one was that the finance director valued the company car fleet above the people. Stood looking out over the car park and said, there is our greatest asset, whereas most people would usually say that's our people. He valued the company car fleet. So those sort of just stories and myths that you'd hear about it. So if they want to flip and they want to be more innovative, because they want to compete against more innovative, maybe adhocracy organizations, then how are they going to do that? They want to be more innovative, responsive, and customer focused. So they needed to break down their hierarchy into more team-based structures, which were focused around market requirements. So trying to make it, allow them to be more responsive. They disseminated decision-making and financial control, so that you didn't have to have 10 people sign off a coffee receipt. So it was a little bit more business case driven resourcing and budgeting. I thought about individual empowerment and accountability. So with local team leaders, so disseminating power. So rather than having one manager who's responsible for 15, 25 people, making sure that there's local team leaders and managers who have some authority. More open plan, hot desks, that kind of thing, online collaboration. What sort of rituals and routines? Well, rather than all annual, much more team huddles, weekly one-to-ones, informal chats, Vision Chip Friday, things like that, a bit more sort of human and a bit more informal. And then it's more about customer impact. This is the things that they want to do. They want individual success stories, innovation suggestions, where they can go, you get rewarded if you come up with something that's innovative. So those were the sort of things that they would put in place. You've got your as is, you've got your to be, and what you're starting to do by having that to be is it gives you greater clarity about what and how you're going to make that change. And also, how do you know when you've achieved it? So it might be different for your organisation, but the cultural web example is just a way in which you can break it down and try and think more clearly. And again, these sort of things are really useful to do with other people in the organisation, other leaders, because the perceptions may well be different. It is like McKinsey 7S, but it's not quite the same. But I forget who the cultural web is by. I think, Harriet. So yeah, so yeah, because there was, it is similar to that. It isn't the same one, but I've forgotten who came up with it. It'll come back to me. So then if you want to do more about this, then how do you plan a successful change? And all of these, if you want to do this, we've just got lots of practical resources. So we have Change Toolkit, where you can download a Word document of this and you can do it yourself if you want to do it. This is just more of a sort of a step through. And again, it's really common sense, but when it comes to change, it's really easy to miss steps out. So having a structure or a process for you to analyse and plan against is going to help you be more successful and to take people with you. So these are your 7 steps to a successful change. First of all, and this is not just culture change, this is any change, but usually a change will involve culture change as well. So my suggestion would be thinking, if you are defining something, what is the change? What do we mean in terms of actually, is it a new system? Can we define whatever it is that we're bringing in, or a new office? And or what are the behaviours linked to it? Or what's the impact on the culture? So is there a cultural change linked to it? It's worth thinking about at the same time. So these steps, I'll briefly go through each of them in turn, is probably the best way to do it. So first of all, really understanding what the change is. So can you simply summarize change in 1 or 2 sentences so that people have clarity about what it is? The reason that is so important is that otherwise the rumour mill will go on saying all of these other things are part of the change. So you can actually just keep the change feeling controlled. So we're moving from an office in Leeds to one in Manchester city centre, for argument's sake, right? Or we are introducing a new performance management system, or a change it could be in terms of we're going to have a 0 tolerance policy for bullying and harassment, right? So whatever it might be, being really clear on what that change is. Then, of course, it's helping people to understand why we need it. And some of you were on last month's webinar, and I think why is one of the most important things for motivating change. So last month's webinar, we talked about the sort of the push and the pull. So people knowing what the vision is, so they're attracted to a positive future, but also moving away from something that might be negative if they don't make the change. So helping people know what the business rationale is, what happens if we don't do anything, and what the gains are. So being able to summarise those quite, to make it clear, because again, it all starts to get quite woolly. So this is a great way for you to start to be clear and simplify it. Knowing what success will look like is really helpful. So something like the cultural web is quite helpful to do that. It gives you the vision in terms of behaviour change, but if you can make it into smart, specific objectives, even better. Think about other projects and actually think about that early before you start communicating it. It's quite scary how often I've been in situations where people go, oh, but they're all ready to go with the change, and then they realise there's some other massive changes that are going on at the same time, which are actually going to clash. So thinking, how will it fit with that other project? Is it part of something larger? How big a priority is it? So you do it at the right time. Scope creep we've all heard of, so make sure we think what and who is in scope. So how much will change and who will be effective? What's in scope, what's out of scope? When you're communicating the change, that's so important to be able to tell people, yeah, we're moving officers, but that's, you're still going to have your same team, you have your same, organizational structure, your same line manager, all of these things will be the same. So helping people to keep change in perspective and not get overwhelmed by it. Then getting down to that sort of micro, how will we do the change? So how are we going to roll it out? Is it going to be a big bang? We're just going to do it overnight, or will we do something gradual? If it's a system, will we be doing training on it? And how will we tell people about these things? So I'm not saying you have to communicate, by the way, all 7 of these steps at the same time, but this is a great way of planning it. And then, of course, helping people understand, when is it happening? Timelines, key milestones, next steps, and an end point. So when should it be done? And of course, that's where, if you are talking about a culture change, then if you think we'll have implemented a new system, for instance, within six months, but the culture change around that in terms of leadership behaviours is maybe going to take 18 months to 24 or even 3 years. So it's being realistic about it. So here for me, just as a little bit of a summary on this, then do have a think about, let's make sure I can get the poll up. And yes, Nita, don't worry, we send you out all of these, the handouts. We'll send you handouts, and we will send you a link to the video, and there's other useful links also in the chat, but they'll be emailed out to you, so don't worry. So you can actually choose more than one if you want to here, but just getting you think. So in terms of these, if you think about when you've experienced change, or you're going through a change yourself, which do you think sometimes gets missed? So to be extra aware of. And so there's quite a few things that we'll send this out. It actually comes as a set of PowerPoints, so you could take a team of people through it if you wanted to, as part of the change toolkit, so it might be useful to you. Okay, so we've got 74% have participated, 77%. Anyone else want to go? Okay, let me end and share this. So that's interesting, isn't it? Quite a lot of people say, quite commonly, how does it fit with other projects? I mean, change seems like a great idea, but we've forgotten about it. And the next least likely one is, what does success look like? So being really clear about where we're going and spending some time forming that. So those are interesting observations, and then the detail in terms of the how. So then the how is important. If you think about different personality types, different people need different aspects of this more than others to make a change. So that's why you need all of these sort of things. So motivating somebody, you've got people who need the detail, and they will not be able to move on until they have got quite a level of detail. Others don't need the detail so much, but they do need to know why it's happening, why it's happening, and pointed in the right direction to know what success is going to look like. So all of them are valid, but some are more valid for different people, which is why it's worth thinking through all of them, in my opinion. Okay, so those are the main steps in terms of this. So Harriet's saying, I think one of the importance is building alliances for the change. So that's when you're going to, when we, what I'm going to cover in November, because there's so much there is so much content on change. I'll look at Cotter model, and we'll go through that in more detail. And what they talk about there is form a guiding coalition, and also on I also talk about that on the last module, which is about collaboration. Because absolutely, you can't do change in isolation. This is much more kind of I suppose cerebral, this particular webinar, whereas the last month's one is very much about what you do as an individual, as a change agent. So you can go back and look at some of that, and it's definitely got collaboration alliances there. And also we've got next month, Cotter is, Cotter for me works really well for large scale change. And whereas this, I think, is quite practical for any size business. So we'll be focusing in on that. So any other questions or comments in the chat, really welcome. Great to have the chat going as we've gone through. Just going back to see if I've missed anything. Let's see. And so basically that's where we're going to end this particular webinar for now. What I was just going to say, I'll run through a few things in terms of links, or pick up any questions there for you. So I hope you found it useful and interesting in some ways. In other things that we've shared the LinkedIn and things like that. So do join us on the launch of the 6 Minute Short. So that will be fun, hopefully. Think about joining us on the coffee club. Be nice to get people having a chance to have a chat with each other. Other things we're doing is management development. So we're doing training on performance management and underperformance. So do consider us if you want me to come and do either webinars or otherwise, then really great to work with people on that. Now, let me just stop my sharing. So let me, oh, which one, Justine, which model hadn't you come across? And let me just share this. And if anybody wants us to come out to you and just give us a little bit of feedback, then that's there. As ever, I'm having difficulty launching a poll. The cultural web. Okay, great. Great. I will try. I will find out who it's by. We'll put that on the email that comes out because I've forgotten who it is. So I definitely did know, but I can't remember at the moment. So let's stop that. Oh, here we go. So if anyone wants to give any other feedback, really welcome it. And next month we have got the final one in our change series, our autumn change series, and then we're going to go on to sort of well-being and other topics next year. If there are any topics that you want us to cover more on, we want more information, do feel free to let us know what they are, because I'm always interested in what's valuable for you guys. But hopefully this one, it's a little bit more cerebral, but there's lots of useful tools that you can have in your kit bag. So do make the most of those and we'll send them out to you. Johnson and Scholes, thank you, Rachel. There we go. It's not the McKinsey 7S. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Thank you for joining, everybody. So we'll send these out to you and see you next time, some of you. Oh, yes, do join us on socials or LinkedIn.